Well, hello, hello.
Hello, hello, everyone.
Welcome to Let's Talk. My name's Leanne.
And I am Jason. And this is Let's Talk.
This is a space where no topic is off limits. We're going to talk from well-being and resilience to leadership, money, relationships, which is kind of our conversation today, mindset, and so much more.
And always here at Let's Talk, we bring different perspectives, real stories, and real honest conversations. Because the things we don't often talk about are actually the things that matter most.
Mm. So, our goal here is simple. We want to spark new ideas, shift your mindsets, and give you some practical tools that you can use for your life and your leadership.
So, whether you're tuning in for inspiration, growth, or just fresh perspective,
Let's talk.
let's talk.
Let's talk. So, our conversation and topic today is all about interconnection well-being, where we're thriving through meaningful relationships. And I think it's such a hot topic. Everybody wants good relationships, and actually, humans are wired for connection. It's not just emotional, it's biological. We need this to survive. And neuroscience tells us that our brains are social organs. Connection releases oxytocin, which lowers stress hormones. It strengthens resilience. It makes us feel good. We like it.
Yet, paradoxically, we're living in one of the most connected times in history. And yet, still, rates of loneliness and that feeling of isolation are higher than ever, folks, especially post COVID. Um, and where we've lost the art of human connection and just been so, because I even know like during COVID, I was so connected to my device and so connected to my laptop that and being not being able to be amongst humans, where we have that real human connection. Yeah, we had FaceTime and that did help a little bit and Zoom, but that human to human in real time connection and in each other's presence in person really, really, I think threw a lot of folks for a loop, and we're still seeing the recovery of that. Is there anything you'd like to put in or add to that, Leanne?
Yeah, I think that post COVID is definitely one. But the saddest thing that I see is young people who can sit together in groups, but they're not talking to each other. They're still on their phones, connecting that way, yet they're in proximity of other people. And there's none of that social kind of interaction face to face. So we've got technology to stay in touch 24/7, but we're actually craving that deeper, more authentic connection, like that eyeball to eyeball, human to human, belly button to belly button kind of connection. So today we're going to talk about what that really means, because we can either belong or we can fit in, and there's a difference between both. So we want to have a look at why belonging versus fitting in and actually matters, and what qualities and quantities and how we can build these connections, and then also build our resilience overall, because we know that people that are connected live longer. And I don't mean socially connected on apps, I mean physically connected to others. It improves their mental state, their emotional state. We learn things from other people. It builds our resilience. Even in the most stressful times, one of the things that we tend to drop off is, oh, I don't have time to see my people. But it's actually in those times that we need to see our people the most, right? To help us kind of bounce back.
Yeah, and that's why connection is just essential for human thriving. And to talk a little bit about the neuroscience, and Leanne and I will kind of popcorn with this area, is that the brain social wiring, the oxytocin, the dopamine, the mirror neurons, like just knowing about that is incredible. And just having a little bit of like insight on, when we get that rush of dopamine because I don't know, we just did something that excited us or we made a connection is so important and empowering to know when we have those moments and not just to like push them aside, but to be with them for a moment. Because, in one of our last episodes, we talked about attention management. Our attention is being drawn in so many spaces. And it's so easy. And I know that I've done this myself, and I'm sure you've done this too, Leanne, um, where, I've had that moment of dopamine and I know it, right? But it's like, oh, I've got to go on to the next thing instead of like being in that moment and knowing how it feels and how I feel, whether I'm with another human being or, I just completed some big work project or whatever, and just that connection to it and being in touch with that feeling is so important because it can change the trajectory to the next moment. Is there anything you'd like to add into that?
Yeah, something that you just said there about the connection to it. And I think interconnection also really stands for the connection that we have to ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're always on this kind of treadmill, we're running through life, and there's so much coming to us and through us. And we've talked about this in previous conversations, but that ability to actually fall still, be present, lean in, feel the feels, right? And
Yeah.
especially when we're talking about the dopamine, the oxytocin, the serotonin, like all of those feel good chemicals, we kind of sideswipe them and just get on with the
Yeah.
next thing. And yet we can sit and ruminate in anxiety and cortisol and adrenaline and all of the yucky feelings and kind of marinate in that for ages.
Totally.
So it's almost like we've got this imbalance of, swimming in the yuck and kind of just skimming along the good, right? And actually pausing and falling still and allowing ourselves to lean into the good as well. Because
Yeah.
when we talk about the brain being a social machine or a social organ, we need to survive as a species through connection. We don't have teeth, claws, fangs that we can tear things apart. So the only way that humans survive and evolve is by community. And we don't give that enough value. And those that have community actually live longer. They're
Mm-hmm.
stronger. They survive. They're resilient. They bounce back. And those that don't can fall into a heap. Really, their
Yeah.
lifespans are shorter, and depression and all sorts of other stuff can kick into the mix. Then, if we don't feel like we've got that connection piece. Um, so it is a psychological need, but it's also a physical need. Connection is not a luxury, it's a basic human need that we have to survive. And Tony Robbins talks about the six human needs of all of us. And they are to feel significant, to have certainty, to have variety, to have love and connection, plus growth and contribution. But the interesting thing is that with love and connection, they've grouped it together. And most people will choose connection because love feels too scary, because then you have to be vulnerable. And most people don't want to kind of lean into that vulnerability. Like we've got this armor up that we're all good. Um, and really, we need to take that armor down and we need to connect with ourselves in order to have this interconnection with others.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting on something that, you said a little bit before the six human needs was, it made me think back in COVID, right? Where a number of my introvert friends was like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing since sliced bread, like having to stay home and not having to interact with people. And, it just really made me think back then. I'm like, wow, I'm like, because I'm such a connection person. Like I'm such an extrovert. I am so on the opposite side of being introverted that it gave me pause to think of like, on the introvert side, like what is it about that introvertness that is so satisfying to them, right? And like the need not to connect with others. Um, and I think that would be, and maybe there is a study out there, right? Like like a study around introverts and extroverts, like who lives longer, right?
Mm.
Like, like, would a study show that extroverts live longer because they're more into human connection, versus introverts? I think that would be a good case study um, to either do or like learn about, to studies that have been done out there. Anything you want to
Yeah,
um,
because
add more into that?
I do, because I don't think introverts don't like human connection. I think it's just a limited amount, like their energy gets drained. So I think they still have human connection, but it's in small doses.
Yeah.
And I think that they're highly connected to themselves and listening
Mhm.
to their needs, their internal needs and what's there. So it would be an interesting study. And I don't know, um, and I'm sure there's studies out there, and that's something actually that now that you've posed the question, I've got to research that. Like, I want to know
I
more
know, me too.
because I
Yes.
think, there's no good or bad, right or wrong. Like, human beings are all different and we all show up in different ways. And, to recharge our own battery is actually a form of self love and self care, which is connection to self.
Hmm.
Whereas sometimes the extroverts in the room, myself included, can keep giving and giving and giving, and then I can be
Yeah.
depleted. And that's
Yeah.
not necessarily ideal either. So finding that balance between the two, I think, is really it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and that battery analogy goes back to episode 3 on emotional well-being, right? With that battery analogy of like, you know, for your phone, like nobody likes their phone on low battery mode because it's like, oh my God, like what if it goes off? Um, and I don't have my charger with me. So, I think it is a balance across, all of these areas of well-being to try to achieve that best balance as possible, so that
Agreed.
you can show up powerfully when it comes to interconnection, um, and being with others, because I mean, I think we've all been with others who are like depleted, and it is not a fun experience, to
No.
be around them.
And I have
um,
personally been deeply depleted, and that's not like a pleasant experience, right? So
yeah.
yeah, so finding the ways to recharge ourselves is so important. Um, and we do have an epidemic of loneliness, at
Hmm.
the moment, where people are more connected via technology, but they're not actually connected um, face to face or in that kind of way. So, depression, inflammation, shorter lifespans, like there's so much science around this because connection isn't just nice to have, it's essential to our overall physical health, our mental health, and our emotional health. So, we need to find ways to connect meaningfully. Our brain
Hmm.
releases these feel good chemicals which allow us to bond. It's why mothers instantly bond with babies because of the oxytocin that gets released. Like these things are biologically in us. Our brain is the greatest pharmaceutical organization, if you want to call it that, in the world.
Hmm.
And it produces the hormones that we need in order to thrive and, well, to survive and thrive. And we need that sense of reward. We need that sense of belonging. These chemicals are literally there to strengthen our overall well-being. And when we don't have that connection, our brain registers loneliness and exclusion the same way that it registers physical pain. So the same regions in our brain light up if you were to watch it under an fMRI machine. Physical pain and emotional pain light up in the same region. So the brain
Hmm.
doesn't know the difference. Like it feels like it is literally in pain. And it's why isolating is so hard for so many people because it just is emotionally draining and psychologically stressful because our DNA actually requires us to connect.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting on when you say that, Leanne, when I think of all the big technology companies, right? And just this, and I've heard that those of us who live in a democracy, right? It's actually is it really a democracy anymore? Is it more of a technocracy, right? On how much big tech is taking over and building systems for that addiction and that, you know, that almost like that campaign to like not have that human to human in-person connection, right? But that, we all need to do it on our devices, and that's where I fear a lot. And I think about it a lot, especially in my doctorate program and, being in business administration and, just like taking all these different classes, like a lot on technology and AI and how that's influencing and, decreasing brain activity. And so, I fear a lot for the younger generation because, like when I grew up and when you grew up, there wasn't a lot of there was different technology, but not this in your hand 24 hours a day almost. Um, so Yes. So I think a lot about the big tech companies and how, yes, they do a lot of good, but they also do a lot of damage and create a lot of this chronic loneliness. Um, and, I think it's folks like us, right? On Let's Talk, who like talk about these issues and get people to think differently and to get into their awareness and to really look at all their areas of well-being. So I'm just super grateful that we chose this area of well-being and all the different sub areas of well-being to like really launch Let's Talk and really making an impactful difference to folks um in the world.
That
Anything you want to add before we go into emotional
Yeah,
intelligence?
I just love that technocracy. Like I've not heard that phrase before, but it just makes so much sense. Like we're not really in a democracy anymore. We are owned by big tech. And it starts young, and I'm not against technology. Like I think it is a fantastic tool,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a terrible master. And
Yep.
unfortunately, many of us have made it the master, not the tool, right? Like
Yes.
it's a servant to us. It shouldn't rule us. And I think
Yep.
we've kind of slipped the balance around that. And you talk about this chronic loneliness. They've done research to say that it actually has as much as a harmful impact on our health as smoking or obesity. Like, this
Mm-hmm.
is not small stuff. This is actually big stuff. It affects our immune functionality, our sleep. We're not able to regulate ourselves anymore because we're not learning those skills face to face in life. Like, that's how we
Yeah.
actually learn a lot of these things. And it's why building and maintaining relationships isn't just social, it's survival. And
Mm-hmm.
emotional intelligence and empathy are connectors. Like we need to use these things. But if we're on our devices and we're not doing human to human connection so much, we're losing the skill of emotional intelligence. We're losing the skill of empathy. And we're
Mm-hmm.
showing highlight reels and then we're disconnected to ourselves because we can't match what we're actually projecting online either. So then it
Yeah.
creates this whole kind of inner turmoil and stress for us because my highlight reel looks all that, but my real life might not be all that.
Totally.
And if I invite people in and they see that I'm not all that, so we're almost kind of perpetuating this loneliness because we can't lean in because we're fearful that people will see the real us, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's being able to empathize, to read cues, to respond, to care for ourselves and other people, and it's in those small moments that connection or that strengthens connection over time. Brene Brown talks about marbles and sand. We can do these big ticket items, buy somebody a car, do something enormous, but actually,
Mm-hmm.
relationship, trust, and connection is built in those small moments. In the phone call, are you okay? In the leaning in the showing up, in the helping somebody, when they're going through
Yeah.
a difficult time. It's not, it's, giving half your chair to somebody who might have been standing. So that way you can both sit with one butt cheek on the chair rather than, one person. Like it's all those little things that
Yeah.
make us feel connected. So for today, we've got a question for you, our listeners. When do you feel the most connected? Like, when is that?
Hmm.
Is it during deep conversations? For me, it is deep conversations. Like, I want to know what tickles your toes. I want to know what makes you tick, right? It's not this kind of superficial, how's the weather conversations, but conversations with depth, with shared laughter. When we
Hmm.
work together towards something, it's those moments that light up our brain's reward system. And that's connection in action,
Yeah.
right? Like, we don't have to just sit still and be static. We can actually be actively connected. Walking with people rather than doing exercises on your own. It's all these little things that have a big impact on how we show up in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting when you were talking about, that phone call to someone to say, "Hey, how are you doing?" Right? Like, it amazes me, like, on how many people don't call anymore. It's all text, it's all instant message. And it's like, you know, and yes, I point to my own self when I do, because I do that too. But I try to really match my energy with phone calls instead of just everything being in text. And it often makes me think at a deep level of, like, why? Like, are people afraid to have those deeper, connected conversations on, phone to phone or speakerphone to speakerphone? Um, because oftentimes you can manage your communication a little bit better via text, right? Like, um, and so, I also challenge people too, like, to the question that Leanne asked, when do you feel most connected? Maybe challenge yourself to make a phone call this week where you would normally just text the person, you know? And is there a difference in how you feel when you connect over text via over phone? So I just wanted to put that in because I think it's so important because we're in such a fast paced world and so much is coming at us, to that attention management, not time management, but attention management, that we talked about in another episode.
And
And
sorry, Jason, I'll let you continue
oh,
because
no, 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 no. I was just going to say to close that is, like, what is one kind of challenge you could challenge yourself this week in the area of interconnection and connection to say, let me just test myself to see if I try to connect in way A instead of B and see if the connection's different. Um, and see if you might get that pop up dopamine and that feel good moment.
yeah. And just you were talking about what you were talking about there. The other thing that comes up for me is energy management. Like,
Hmm.
some people in your life will give you energy and that feel good feeling, and others may, actually drain some of your energy. So you can be selective about who, when, where, and how.
Hmm.
But we do challenge you to lean into interpersonal, like this kind of face to face, getting, well, I say this kind, but here we are on Zoom. But this is actually even better than texting because I can see you. I can pick up the nuances. We're smiling, we're laughing. It's more connected than a text. And if we were in the same country, we would be eyeball to eyeball, right? Like, doing
Yes.
this. Absolutely. But, and one day we will, no doubt. So, what makes
Yes.
connection possible for you? And when do you feel most connected? That's what we really want you to start thinking about. And how can you build more of that in? Because we do
Hmm.
have technology fatigue, we have Zoom fatigue. If this is all you're doing, and when we don't have enough of um, that in person connected conversation where
Hmm.
you are energy sharing together. And that's a beautiful thing. And it's something we need.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if our listeners listen to past episodes, you will see this thread of connection, right? From, physical well-being to, it just always reminds me, and I remind myself of this too sometimes where I'm like, oh my gosh, like I have not hardly walked at all today. Like I've been working and maybe walk to the kitchen or et cetera. It's like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna do my next call. I'm gonna do that out for 10 to 15 minute walk. you
Mm.
know. um I may be connecting with the person on the phone, but I'm actually doing that other area of well-being, which is physical well-being. So um love the question that you just posed to folks, and also that challenge, and then also how can you weave in the other areas of well-being that we've talked about kind of throughout your day so that you kind of see this 360 model.
Yeah. Because it's not just one and done, right? We need
Yeah.
that physical well-being, we need the emotional well-being, we need the mental and intellectual well-being, we need that spiritual well-being that we discussed last week. And today it's about this connection piece. And they're all interlinked because it's connection to self, connection to others. And you can kind of blend all of these things in together and have a more holistic approach to your life.
Mhm.
Like we are talking about 360. It's not just one corner. We want your whole life to be well, to being well as opposed to well-being, right? So,
Right.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so now we're going to move to we're going to move into talking about, quality over quantity. And I know that might spark some, what do you mean by quality over quantity, right? Um, and kind of the essence of this is that it's not on how many connections we have, but it's how real they are, right? And I challenge folks to take a pause to really sit with that for a moment. Is when you look at like, oh my gosh, I have 3,000 connections on Facebook or 3,000 connections on Instagram. Awesome, because I have a lot too. But how many of those are real connections, real authentic, where you could pick up the phone call or send a text, to have that deeper level of connection, um, and that leans into the social media illusion, right? How many followers do I have? You know, um, to how many deep relationships do I have out of those followers? It's probably a pretty small percent when you really sit down and think about it. Um, but hey, like, yeah, like we're trying to get more followers and subscribers for our podcast here, Let's Talk. And we hope that that spreads far and wide. And we know we may never know a lot of those people personally. And some we will know personally. So, just that whole area of social media illusion, and to really think about, okay, how many followers, how many connections do I have, and how many of those are actually deep connections and relationships?
Yeah.
And that ties into the area of your weak ties and your core circle. And I know, like Leanne is referred to, like kind of like your courage circle too, right? Like,
Yeah.
who are those individuals who give you courage, like that you can go to and lean into and be like, I am having a bad day here today. Like,
And be real and true and authentic, right?
exactly, to like give me that boost, right? Um, and both of those have roles, but depth drives well-being. So an example here is that you can have 5,000 followers and still feel lonely. Think about that. You can have 5,000 followers, but still suffer from chronic loneliness. But what really matters is the depth of your connections. Those few people who truly get you, and I point me because who truly get me, who will listen without judgment. And, I know that we've talked about that, like that listening without judgment, or listening to understand versus listening to react. And you'll get to know that, like, maybe those individuals who always listen to react, maybe think about what your connection is with them. Is it truly a deep connection where you can both be fully authentic with one another and pass no judgment? So with that, I will turn it back over to Leanne.
Yeah. The thing that kind of popped into my mind as you were talking about this kind of digital or illusion. There's a song that
Illusion.
right back from the 80s. Anyway, um, my head does that. I say a word, a song comes to mind. But one of the things about this kind of illusion around social media and our connections online is that we get instant gratification if we get a
Hmm.
like or a tick, but it doesn't last long, right? So we kind of crave more of that and more of that. But when we're sitting in our courage circle, as I like to call it, with those people that kind of um, lift your spirits, those that you can lean into and be real, raw, and vulnerable with. Those kind of feelings can last for hours, days, even, right? Because we feel connected. So it's not that quick fix; it's more that that feel good feeling, sustainable
Hmm.
over a longer period of time, and that is really important because we're kind of so used to these things happening so quickly, but they also dissipate very quickly. And um, the difference between those deeper connected relationships versus those kind of superficial likes is
Hmm.
completely different. And we show up differently. We want to belong. Like I said earlier, it's a core human need. And sometimes instead of belonging, we kind of shape shift ourselves to fit in, right? We kind of we become chameleons almost, and we contort ourselves in order to meet somebody else's perception of who we think they want us to be, as opposed to being authentically ourselves. And in order to have deep connection, we need to be authentic. Like, we need that depth, and we need to be non-judgmental, as you said, Jason, about other people's authenticity. Because it's easy to shape shift and fit in, but it doesn't actually give us anything long term, right? If
Hmm.
anything, that disconnects us from ourselves. And again, when we're talking about connection, it is to self and others. We're not saying be selfish, but actually honoring self, being true to yourself around who you are and showing up authentically actually fosters beautiful connection and relationships. So belonging means being accepted for who you are. Fitting
Hmm.
in actually means changing who you are to be accepted. And I know long term that being accepted for who I am is much easier to maintain than fitting in and shape shifting just to be accepted. And I
Yeah.
think that, especially with social media at the moment, um, so many of our youth are having to show up in a particular way. They're shape shifting to fit in, but there's no true belonging in that. They don't feel that sense of connection. It's why we have such high rates of mental health issues, suicidal ideation, so many disorders, eating disorders, so many things that are showing up in our youth because they're having to disempower who they really are in order to perform and fit into what they think culture or society needs. And they're disconnecting from themselves. And that is just so sad. So, authenticity is the foundation of trust. Authenticity is the foundation of emotional safety. Authenticity is the foundation of connected relationships. And that's, if we are authentic, if we allow our authenticity to shine and to come in and show up as our real selves, imperfections, quirks, weirdness, a whole lot, right? Like, you'll hear me come up with Leanneisms all the time that aren't real words, but I create them. I try and show up as me, and I am quirky and left field, and I don't fit the box. That is okay. Actually, that's perfect and that's beautiful. When we're doing this kind of performance, we're disempowering ourselves and those around us. And that's not where trust is built. Trust is built through us connecting, through showing up, through being exactly who you're meant to be, and loving yourself, imperfections at all. And Brene Brown talks about this in so many of her books. Braving the Wilderness is one. You know, Vulnerability is the cornerstone of trust and relationships.
Hmm.
There's so much good stuff, and we often talk about Brene because she's a scientist and a great storyteller. So she does the research and then she shares it in a way that most people can understand in layman's terms. So we need to build trust. And we do that by being completely authentic, by accepting yourself first and accepting others around you, right? That's where belonging is. Whereas if we're just trying to fit in, we're shape shifting, we're changing ourselves to be accepted. And our relationships are superficial, they don't have that depth. And we want that depth at the end of the day because that is what keeps us thriving in our crazy VUCA world that we're in.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, so many just rich gold nuggets there, Leanne. And I think a key insight that our listeners can take away from this area of quality over quantity is that connection thrives when we are seen, heard, and valued. So,
Say that again, seen, heard, and valued, right?
yep, seen, heard, and valued, and consciously choosing depth over digits.
Yeah.
And I think that can be scary for some folks, but kind of another challenge is like, you know, lean into that that area, that connection thrives when we're seen, we're heard, and we're valued as a whole human being. Um,
And we need to see, hear, and value ourselves,
Absolutely.
right? It starts with us. Like at the end of the day, if we can't accept ourselves, if we can't value who we are, if we're not seeing our beauty in the quirks and all, and if we're not listening to what's really important to us,
Mm-hmm.
then we're doing that disservice to ourselves, let alone to anyone else.
Absolutely. It kind of leans into that analogy is that, you have to love yourself first before you can love others.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people try to do the opposite of that. um, and it may work in different moments, but in the long term, it'll come back to where you need to kind of flip that script to say, wait a minute, like I need to look at me and how do I love myself? How do I value myself? And how do I hear myself too? Right. Like, being aware of how you speak, your words that you use, how you interact with people, and the words that you use in those interactions.
And
Um,
even, Jason, how you speak to yourself, like that itty bitty shitty committee that's, always on the go in our brain. Very rarely does it say, "Hey, Leanne, you did good." It's usually, "That didn't work. This is not working." Like the way we speak to ourselves, I often actually say to people, speak to yourself as you would a child or your best friend. Like, would you
mhm,
actually speak to your child that way, the way that you actually speak to yourself inside your own head? A chance in hell. Like, we are so cruel to ourselves, crueler than we
mhm,
could be to anybody else in our world. So I give you all permission. Take the stick out of your hand, right? And if you notice that you're reprimanding yourself, having a go at yourself, actually flip the script and find something nice to say. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to be narcissistic and grandiose and have these kind of tendencies where we don't care about others. That's not what I'm saying. But real truth and real care comes from caring for yourself first. So if
mhm.
I can love me and accept me, then I have that muscle and the skill to be able to love you and accept you. And I think that's the
Absolutely.
key here. It's really it goes both ways. It's an inside job, which then shines out of us and becomes an
Yeah.
outside job.
Yeah. And I think that speaks into our conversation last week on spiritual well-being when I brought up with Jitesh and that self as instrument, right? Looking at yourself as an instrument. And it's like, if you can't look into that instrument and know where, the clogs need to be cleaned out, where it's like, okay, we just need to give this a good shower and like, recalibrate, you know, the deep work is tough. It's sometimes scary, sometimes ugly, but at the end, you're going to thank yourself. Um, so, in such a grandiose way if you do that work in all this that we've talked about thus far. Um, Anything you want to leave with that before we move on to technology and connection?
Yeah, I think, to your point, accountability. Like, it's okay for me to look at myself and go, you know what? I did something there and I'm not proud of that. That's not how I want to show up. And I can be accountable and I can repair and I can choose to show up differently. But that doesn't mean I need to beat myself up for the next 6 years about it.
Right.
We've got to be accountable and responsible, but doing the work actually means forgiveness of self and others potentially, but definitely forgiveness of self. Um, and taking responsibility. I think we spoke about this in last week's session too, that responsibility around it is me, I did that, and I choose to do better tomorrow. Lifting the
Mhm.
rug, looking beneath and going, "Ooh," you know, "Yep, that was." But the benefit of doing that is that we can then have empathy for others because
Mhm.
we're not perfect. So we can't expect others to be.
Yeah.
Forgiveness of self and others, we can be much less judgmental because, hey, we're all human beings fumbling through life with our training wheels on, trying to get it right. And we don't always. But if we can take that responsibility and accountability and do the inner work, do the work, I think there are so many people who are just too scared to actually look within because some of it, as you said, Jason, is not pretty. But
Mhm.
there's beauty on the other side of that. And if
Mhm.
the only way out is through, and the only way to get through is to lean into the yuck, right? So we can come out the other side as, truer, more real, more vulnerable humans that really then can have that depth of connection that we so crave, and that we're just not allowing ourselves to have.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of, taking the journey down the yellow brick road, like in the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
There's some happy times, there's some times, but when you get to that end of that yellow brick road, it's like, oh, awesome. There's so much more beauty, on the other side. But um doing that work, um it's tough sometimes, but that's okay.
Yeah,
That's
it's
okay.
tough, but not impossible. And we can do tough things. We can do tough things. Um, anything that's worthwhile doesn't come too easy. We learn who we are through the adversity, through the struggle, through the yuck. That's where we learn we strengthen our backbone. It's where we
Hmm.
can really learn what we're made of, right? When we're just cruising along and everything's nice, we're not learning much at all. Um, but when we do the hard things, uh, that's where the gold comes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So with that, we've talked a lot about technology, and connection, but we're just gonna, you know, continue this conversation for a few more minutes in this area. And that really, the digital connection is a double-edged sword, right? There are positives, benefits, and there's the downsides. Um, and like we said, post COVID, the world is hyper connected but lonely, right? And we've talked about a lot about that loneliness. And looking on the other side of the teeter totter, on the benefits of technology, right, is the accessibility. We've mentioned that, like, Leanna and I talk about it all the time. I mean, I'm here in Los Angeles, she's there in Sydney. Like, this wouldn't have been possible, or it would have been more difficultly possible previously, at probably a higher expense too, right? So that Zoom gives us, like, um, this amazing opportunity to do this podcast of Let's Talk. It opens yourself up to a global community, connecting with people from all over the world. I mean, I remember during COVID, attending conferences via Zoom, and it's like, oh my gosh, like I can be here in Los Angeles, but people from Africa, Europe, Australia, Asia, maybe the Penguins, could get online and, attend this conference. And just the global connections was just so amazing, so amazing. And along with that, it gives us the ability to maintain ties with people that we meet from around the globe. Um, and that's just what's just so amazing. And the opportunities, if you really get creative, of like what you can do with technology to do a more massive reach out to folks and to connect to folks and to get your message out and to get your expertise out, etc. Um, do you want to talk about, you know, the downsides?
So we'll talk about the downsides for sure. But like I've got a personal story around this, right? Like my
Yeah.
sister lives in Italy and we can't communicate all the time because of time zone differences. Sometimes having a conversation when I want to talk to her, it's like 2 a.m. there or vice versa. You know, Jason, you and I do the same thing. So, but we can share our life on social media to each other. I see her kids growing. She sees my kids growing. We see what we're doing, the new hairstyles, all of this stuff. Like it can actually work really lovely to maintain those relationships, maintain those ties, especially where there is distance, right? So again, using technology as a tool, not as a master. And I think
Yeah.
this is the imbalance because we've kind of given it so much leeway into our lives that we've forgotten the art of the conversation, the phone calls and the like. And to your point around, accessing this global community, I mean, it's phenomenal that we can be sitting in our respective countries on 2 different days of the week. Like for me, it's Thursday. For you, it's Wednesday. I can tell you your tomorrow is going to look beautiful. But, we can do this thing with global technology. So the benefits are vast, but there is absolutely downsides. The first one that I want to talk about is this idea of superficial interaction. Like we're showing highlight reels, there's no depth. We're scrolling potentially swipe lefts and rights, and we're forgetting that there's a human being at the other side of that. We're comparing ourselves, our real life, to other people's highlight reels. So it can create anxiety and depression. We get this dopamine addiction because every time we get a like, especially if you're doing online dating and things like that, it's like ding, oh, I feel good. But there's superficial connections, then there's not depth, and we need
Mhm.
depth. We've got this idea of we're reducing our face-to-face social skills and we're building this addictive nature to superficial values, um, which it feels icky, I have to say. Like like it's not normal. Like I'm a single woman. I'm a bit older in my life. I'll say I'm in my early 50s. Um, and old school way of dating was you'd go out, you'd meet people in places, you'd see if there was chemistry, you'd have conversations, you'd have laughter. There was that energy exchange. These days,
Mhm.
you're kind of doing this. And you get ghosted if it doesn't work instantly. I heard a story. A gentleman was telling me that he was out on a date with a woman that he met from a, swipe left, swipe right, an online dating scene. He went to the bathroom, and when he came back, he saw in the reflection of the window that she was sitting by that she was swiping while on a date. Now, so, there's all
Multitasking.
multitasking. But because of that, and because I can leave you this second, get into my car, and I can start getting gratification and these kind of dopamine releases by others instantaneously, we've lost the art of getting to know somebody. We've lost
Mhm.
the art of spending quality time, of that energy, of getting, the dating phase. Like it's so interesting these days. And that's
Yeah.
just one aspect of it. I mean, there's so many other aspects. We talk about the benefits. I bought a motorbike recently. And one of the things that I decided is that I want to ride in a group. So I've got online to find a group of people, women in my local area that ride together so I can join that. So technology is great. But if all I'm doing is online and not actually getting out to meet them and I'm just watching what they're doing via technology, then that's where we fall apart. So there's this kind of fragmented attention that we're creating because we want that next dopamine hit. And we're not actually spending time and quality and depth with
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And I find it really challenging. And, like I say, old school. I'm old school. But that's not the way it happens today. So for me, the thought of doing this and trying to look at photos, and how can you judge who somebody is from a photo they post? And I have to say to the men out there, take better photos. Half of them you see their noses up, or or they look like, and it's not that they're not attractive men, it's just that they're not used to using cameras and they're not doing this. But people aren't even thinking about the person behind the photo.
Yeah.
They're just going,
Yeah.
yep, nah, yep, nah. And if you met face to face, you might have a connection because you might have similar interests. You might have, similar sense of humor. There could be a whole lot of stuff, and we're not even getting to that. And that's the downside of technology because it's keeping that wall almost between us, which is safe. I can look at 300 men in one night if I wanted to on an online app, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's any depth and any connection, really, like real connection.
Yeah. You know, one thing that came to mind as you were talking about these downsides, Leanne, was, like for somebody who is very social and goes out and, my partner and friends and everything. And, it's amazing when you take a step back, even when you're out amongst other human beings, on how much their technology device is distracting them, and they're on their phones, flipping, texting, all that kind of stuff when they're in your own presence. Now, I'm not saying that I've never done that, you know, because I have, but I really try to be aware of that, of like, what message are you sending to the other individual or individuals in your group if you're on your phone when you're in their presence? You're
Mm.
almost saying that's what's right here is more important than you,
Yeah.
of making the time to be together, have a conversation. So I just challenge folks to like look at that awareness, right, of like when you're out and about, maybe just say, okay, you know what, if I need to check my phone, I'll do it when I go to the restroom, or take a moment here and there, but it shouldn't dominate your time with other human beings. And another message for parents, and I'm not a parent, but I observe a lot of parenting behavior out there of parents who just shove technology, iPads, their phone, etc., in their child's face when they're out and about or in the car, and they're they're not teaching them the interaction and the connection skills to other human beings. And this is, I mean, I say often, I'm like, like I really feel for this younger generation, because they're going to not have the connection skills that my generation may have. And there's always the positive and negatives, but I always think there's a sweet balance with that. And Leanne, as a parent of three kids, um is there anything that you'd like to say with that? Because I'm sure that you've had to deal with the technology piece over the years of raising your twins and your youngest.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting one. Again, technology is a tool. And in my house, for instance, we do not have technology at the dinner table, like phones down so we can connect. Like that is mandatory. And my kids will try and sneak it in and do, shifty things and think I can't see what their body language is telling me. And I'm like, a phone down, otherwise I'll take it away for the night. So I have used technology. There have been times where I have put the iPad in front of my kids because I needed um, some time to do whatever it was that I was doing, but in moderation. And I think as I said earlier, one of the saddest things that I see, I was dropping my youngest son off to school last week, and I watched 5 kids walking together. They'd gotten off the bus and they were walking to school, together, all of them walking in a group, all of them like this, not one conversation being had. And I think that's where we've lost the art. Like it's an art, right? Relationships is an art, communication is an art. Connection is an art, and we've kind of lost the art, or we're not educating the art. And I'm not against technology. Like I love it. It does so
Mm-hmm.
much good in my world. So I'm not like anti-tech. But again, it's a great servant, not the master. And I think we need to really be mindful of, am I using it or is it using me?
Mhm.
And that's the question we need to be asking. Like, really, I can, have a full on day and think, you know what, I need half an hour just to defrag and, wind down. And I might get on my socials or do something like that. That's great. But if I'm still there 2 hours later, then it's using me.
Yep.
I can get onto Facebook and I can post stuff and I can see my sister's life and all sorts of different things. And that's great. That's a tool. But if I'm then scrolling through reels and I'm there an hour later, then it's using me. And so the
Mhm.
question that we need to ask is, are we using technology or is it using us? And sometimes we might have to do a technology detox, like
Mhm.
really. And it feels terrifying. Like we would rather leave the house without so many other things. But if we leave without our phone, it's like it's like life or death. Whereas when I was growing up, the only phone we had was attached to the wall. You'd have the
Yep.
cord wrapped around your
Yep.
ankle. The phone would ring. Everyone would run to it, hoping it was for them. And that was life. These days, it comes with you to the bathroom, to the shopping center, to your kids' recitals. It doesn't matter. So, and the and I'm as much in this as everybody else. And the thing that I find really funny is when I'm yelling at my kids, put your phone down, and yet mine is in my hand. Right. So do like monkey see, monkey do. And so
Yep.
we can't tell them to get off their technology if we're on it all the time. And so as parents, we kind of need to lead by example. We need to lean into this and actually be real about, again, it's me. I'm the problem. I can't tell them not to be on their tech if I'm on mine.
Yep.
And so much of our world, so much of our work is technology based. So much of our infrastructure is technology based. But we've got to choose quality over quantity, like quality of connection rather than this quantity of technology. And this digital detox, set boundaries in your life about technology. Um, whether it's a phone free Friday. I mean, they did that at one of my kids' schools. They just, every Friday, no kid could have their phone, not even to pay for their lunches. So why can't we do that in our homes? Why can't we have, no phones at the dinner table? Why can't we, have a games night once a week or once a fortnight where we're actually interacting and playing Snap or or whatever it is, as opposed to this technology, so we can rebuild the foundations that we've lost around that connection
Yeah.
piece.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like when you were talking about, right, like I have my phone in my hand, but I'm telling my kids, like I think it goes back to what we were talking earlier too, right? If you're not willing to do the deep work, right, and to look and see kind of your behaviors and your patterns around connection, interconnection, then you do not have the floor to be telling other people, right? So it's that awareness piece. And sometimes we get that awareness like in the moment, we're like, oh, wait a minute,
Oh,
like my
wait a
phone's
minute.
too, oops, gotta put it down.
Like, don't.
Yeah. So a challenge that we put out there for folks is how can we use technology to enhance meaningful connection instead of replacing it, right? Um, and that could be like joining social groups, not dating apps, right? Um, look at your hobbies. Like, look at your hobbies where, it's like, okay, like I actually need my technology device. So it's a healthy way to use it within this hobby. And then, you know what? This hobby over here doesn't need technology. I can just put my phone down or put it in my bag or whatever. And, looking at just fun in your life, right? Like, be balanced around that fun, around like the technology enhancing fun, right? And I think we got so used to that behavior and pattern in COVID, right? Where it was like just all the stuff came out that you could do in your phone and devices and everything. But take a step back and look at like, okay, how can I make this a little bit more of a sweet spot of like fun activities that use technology in a meaningful way and fun activities and hobbies that don't need technology, so where you can have that digital detox and live into that technology hygiene. Anything you want to add into that before we move into our
Yeah,
next section?
get the hell out of your house.
Right.
You know, like, I remember growing up, we were never in the house. We were playing on the streets, riding our push bikes, getting out there. Like, these days, you don't see kids outside. They don't play in the streets anymore. I don't know about where you live, Jason, but here in Australia, you very rarely see kids playing outside in the streets where we did that all the time. And then even
Yeah.
with adults, right? Like we're so used to doing this at home that we're not actually putting ourselves out there. We're not getting out. So again, as to Jason's point, finding, like I said, I joined a group that goes out motorbike riding because I recently bought a bike. And that is a hobby. It's something that I love to do, but it's also the social interaction that I'm craving. So I'm meeting like minded people who have got similar interests as me. And we can then go and do fun stuff together. Yeah. As
Yeah.
opposed to being in the house, which kind of ticks the box around social well-being. It ticks the box around emotional well-being. It ticks the box around physical activity, because we're getting out, we might be walking. Even yesterday, I was running a program actually, and I realized that two women get together and walk around my local park, right? So that,
Mm.
and I actually just invited myself. Would you mind if I came and joined you next time you went for a walk? Because I can walk around the park by myself, by all means, but it's certainly more fun if there's conversations and a bit of laughter. And so then I'm ticking, the physical well-being and the connection well-being and the other things. So get out of your house, would be the thing that I'd say to
Yeah,
that. Find
absolutely.
hobbies, join groups. So what if it feels awkward? So what if it doesn't, if you're like, oh, I don't want to do this by myself. If you do go once or twice, you will no longer be by yourself because you'll have a circle of people that are like-minded who are into the same thing. So get out of your comfort zone
Hmm.
because on the other side of the comfort zone is where joy lives. It's where bliss
Yeah.
lives. It's where laughter lives. It's where connection lives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that speaks a lot around that spiritual well-being that we were talking about last week, right? Kind of like your home center core, right? And which all these different aspects live there. And so, you know, finding that sweet spot, that balance. And this is one area where you got to find that balance. Um,
Yeah.
so within that, are we ready to talk about building resilient relationships?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. So the giving and receiving supports and strengthens well-being. So when you think about building resilient relationships, right, that reciprocity of connection, resilience is relational, asking for help as a strength, not a weakness. And if you think about that, asking for help is a strength, not a weakness. Um, the connection that comes within that to another human being, whether it's a family member or a colleague or whatever, leaning into that vulnerability is amazing. The connection that you can have with another human being while being vulnerable. Because, yeah, we know none of us want to ask for help, right? But it's like getting that itty bitty shitty committee that's on stage at the moment to go stage right or stage left is just there's so much magic that can happen with that um, because it brings in that learning to accept help, right? And then next is listening deeply and validating your emotions. This is emotional intelligence in action for sure. Lant, do you want to do the next couple?
Yeah, I do. But I just want to speak to something that you said there. I remember years ago, my father is a very wise man, and I was talking about something, and I love to help people. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
love going out of my way and supporting others and helping them and spending time and, doing all of that stuff. It makes me feel good when I'm able to be of service to somebody else. But I wouldn't allow people to be in service to me. And I remember my dad once said to me, who the hell do you think you are to rob people of that feel good feeling by being able to give to you? And it just kind of set me on my butt, right? It was like, oh, I like to feel good by helping others, but I'm actually
Mm-hmm.
not allowing them to feel good by helping me. Like, how selfish is that? I've got it. I don't need help. I'm fine. I'm good. But I'm actually robbing them of that feel good feeling of being
Mm-hmm.
in service. And who the hell am I to do that? And I remembered I just kind of, it was one of those conversations that, I just had to sit with for a while and
Yeah.
go, whoa, I'd never looked at it from that perspective. So yeah, we can kind of go, yeah, I'm fine. I don't need help. Um, but what you're actually doing is robbing people of their sense of contribution. And contribution is one of the core um, what would I human needs. It's one of the things that makes us feel like we're thriving in life. So if
Yep.
we can't contribute to others, we're not actually feeling good about ourselves. And I was inhibiting that. I was stopping people from doing that. And it was one of those kind of moments where I went, oh, that's not who I want to be. I don't want to
Yep.
rob other people of feeling how I feel when I'm giving, when I'm sharing, when I'm contributing. Um, yeah. So I just wanted to kind of double click on that because I don't think we look at it from that perspective. We kind of go, oh, no, I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't need help. But what we're actually doing is disempowering somebody else. And
Yeah.
that's not nice.
Yes. And a very happy birthday to your dad
Thank you. It
today.
is his birthday today. So if he listens, happy birthday, Daddy. Love you. Um, and yours too today, Chase. And it's interesting because our dads are born a day apart. But because we're here now, it's both today because it's
Yes.
yesterday for me in in America. So happy heavenly birthday to yours too, my friend.
Yes. Thank you so much.
So we need to use um, connection. We need to um, use it as a tool because when we do, we're more optimistic, and optimism
Mhm.
kind of buffers that stress hormone. These micro moments of connection, these small acts of kindness that we do helps us feel good. And when we feel good, our life is good. So when we're doing regular check ins, when we're actually looking for opportunities to be kind, when we're actually grateful for the things that we have in our lives, these are all micro moments of connection. And it's the little things that can have a big impact.
Mhm.
So, if you're going through a tough period, reach out. It You don't have to do this thing called life on your own. Give other people the opportunity to contribute to you. And I remember I was going through a serious breakup and I just closed all my windows and blinds and wanted to hibernate under the blanket eating ice cream. And somebody came over and said, "That's it, we're going out." And I'm like, "No, I'm depressed. I don't want to go out," like as you do. And they forced me out of my house, like literally forced me. Like, I'm
Mhm.
not leaving unless you're coming. And we went for a walk. And by the time I got back, I felt so much better. Sunshine, serotonin, connection, a bit of laughter, fresh air. It makes all the difference. So, really, if you are going through a hard time, reach out to people. Tough periods don't have to be weathered alone. That's where connection is. It's those tiny micro moments that build trust. And if you notice others going through a tough time, reach out to them. Just check in. Even if they don't respond, just seeing that somebody cares is
Mhm.
enough to start shifting some of the way we feel. Because connection isn't about being surrounded by people, it's about being emotionally available and authentic. And it comes back to that
Absolutely.
authenticity.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to put in about the emotional availability and authentic is by you showing up, being emotionally available, sometimes that invites the other person to do the same thing,
Yeah.
who may be like, nah, mm, I don't want to be emotionally available. But sometimes it's that modeling behavior, right? Like modeling authentic emotional availability can have a powerful impact, even if it's in small micro doses. Those small micro doses over time can have a huge impact in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, Jason, because we sometimes forget that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so as we kind of close down on our conversation today about interconnection well-being, before we move into our exciting book recommendations and top tips that we always have for you, um, is that we want to reflect, encourage, and inspire, right? So as human beings, we thrive through those meaningful connections. And I think it's a great time for pause to think about yourself as a human, how you connect to others, and those patterns of connection, are they healthy patterns of connection or are they unhealthy?
Mm.
And if they are, what strategies can you do to flip the script or go on the other side of the teeter totter, like I always like to say? So just remember, humans thrive through meaningful connection, and you got to look within your own self to see how you connect with others, but then also ask yourself too, how do you like others to connect to you? And are you modeling that behavior?
Yeah. Because who we are and how we show up reflects what we receive in return, to your point earlier. Um, and am I being the sort of friend that I would like to be? Or am I
Mhm.
being the sort of friend that I would like to have? Am I spending the time with people the way that I would like them to spend time with me? Am I doing the things that I would like in my life? Like, it's okay to blame others, it's their fault. They're not doing this. I blah blah blah. But when I point a finger at you, there's three fingers pointing back at the end of the day. We've got to be responsible and accountable and show
Mhm.
up the way that we want to show up, the way that we want others to show up for us. So there's no point expecting others to do what you're not prepared to do, you know? And if, they often say, if be be the change you want to see in the world. And I think this kind of really fits here as well. Be the sort of friend, be the sort of connector that you would like to have in your world.
Mhm.
Because who we are and what we put out there is what we get back. That law of reciprocity, as we mentioned earlier, is really interesting. If I'm kind, if I'm generous, if I'm connected, if I go out of my way, then I get good stuff. And actually, Mel Robbins talks about this in her book, The Let Them Theory. She talks about the impact or the difficulty in adult friendships. So when we're at school, friendships are easy because we're there. We're in proximity with people. We're there. We're
Mhm.
at school. We're at university. In the workplace, we've got, proximity again, right? So we become friends with those that we work with because we're close physically in space. But adult relationships are harder because of different stages, different lives. I might have kids, you might not. I might be going through a divorce, you might be married. I might have moved to a different country, so we're no longer, or a different state or a different city. So we no longer have that proximity. So adult relationships are actually harder to make and maintain because of that, because we're not kind of 24/7 or every day seeing you in the workplace. And, people say, well, why should I always be the one to reach out or do this or do that? Like, does it matter who's the one? Really, does
Right.
it matter? I'm sure that if you reached out to somebody you haven't spoken to for a long time, their world might just be chaos and crazy busy. But that doesn't mean that they don't value you reaching out. It doesn't mean that they don't miss the connection. So rather than waiting for others to do it, be the one, right? Be the one. Is
Yeah.
probably where I want to leave that today because I think we can often wait and hope um, and judge. And
Mhm.
instead, why not just be the one? Be the one to make the call, be the one to show up, be the one to go out, be the one to organize a get together.
Yeah.
Um, and understand that adult friendships and relationships are harder. So you have to put yourself into situations like social groups, like hobbies,
Mhm.
like whatever, to find the like minded community um, at this stage of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to that end, is that technology can help or hinder those situations, right? So just be mindful and choose intentionally. Um, you know, like ask yourself the question, is this a healthy technology? Is this a meaningful use of technology or an unmeaningful use of technology? It's a simple question. It takes yourself like 2 seconds to ask yourself. So it's building that resilience around, do I always have to use technology for everything? Or hey, like this is actually going to be a really good use of technology for A, B, and C. Um, so bring that into your awareness. And um, also as a reflection, why do you feel, or not why, who do you feel most connected to? Right. And what can you do this week to deepen that bond? I think that's a question that we often forget to ask ourselves is who do we feel most connected to? Is, maybe it is the folks that you are chatting with on Facebook, right? Or Instagram, or maybe it's a combo, but, take pause and ask yourself, who do I feel most connected to and why? And what can you do this week? It's only Wednesday here and it's only Thursday there, um, to deepen that bond. And I know we've presented kind of a lot of challenges, and which you can take these challenges over the next couple of weeks, but I think these are important questions to ask yourself and to reflect upon, because it's going to make you so much more of a powerful connector, and along with the connections that you make in your life, whether they're personal, professional, new, old, somewhere in between.
Because relationships are everywhere. Everything we do is about relationship. Whether it is work, whether it is personal, whether it is your community, your church group, like it doesn't matter, right? Relationships are everywhere. Um, and and spending the time to foster that. They talk about the 1 millimeter rule. If I shift something just 1 millimeter, it doesn't look like a big impact today. But over time, that 1 millimeter gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? And then
Yeah.
the impact of all of that in my life makes a significant difference. So what's that 1 millimeter thing you can do today that if you continue doing that is going to give you great outcomes down the track? Because connection really is the energy that exists between people. And when we feel seen, heard, and valued, right, that's when we thrive. And when we're seeing, hearing, and valuing others, that's when they thrive. So, what can you do to be more authentic in the quality of the relationships that you have going forward?
Awesome. Okay.
Awesome.
So, are we ready for book
I
recommendations?
think we are. So, would you like to share screen or would you like me to? I can share.
Awesome. Okay.
Um, there we go. Book recommendations.
Okay. Do you want to take the first one?
So the first book recommendation is Social, Why Our Brains. Sorry, I'm just trying to move something on my screen that just jumped up. Social, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Connect. So this book gives you information about the neuroscience of connection. So we've spoken to this today, and we really want this to give you more of an insight, the neuroscience behind that human connection, and um, exactly how you can kind of create more of this. So the author Matthew Lieberman explains how our brains are literally desired for social interaction and why disconnection impacts our health as much as our mental health, our physical health, our emotional health, but also physical pain, which is interesting. So the more connected we are, the less physical pain we feel in our life. So the key takeaway of this book is connection isn't optimal; it's a biological need. So get out there and connect. So that's the first book.
Awesome. So, our next book is by Dr. Brene Brown. We've actually had a lot of book recommendations by Brene Brown, but just such a wonderful author and scientist and researcher and human being. So this week's book recommendation by Brene Brown is Braving the Wilderness: The Quest for True Belonging and the Courage to Stand Alone. And you know, this this book and conversation around belonging in versus fitting in echoes Brene Brown's central message. She explores in this book how authenticity, vulnerability, and courage lead to genuine belonging, both in personal and professional relationships. And And a key takeaway from this book is that true belonging doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. And that's just such a powerful quote from the book. And I don't know, Leanne, have you read this book? Because I
Yeah, I
have not.
have. Yeah, I have. And listen, I've read most of Brené's books because, like I say, she's a fantastic scientist and researcher, and I love science. A bit of being the neuro nerd that I am, but she's also a fantastic storyteller. And so this
Mhm.
book is a really good book around really looking at this whole idea of no longer fitting in and actually belonging and what I can do. And that quote that you just said, that key phrase, true belonging doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are, authentically be
Mhm.
who we are. And if we can let go of some of the stories and the stuff around us and get rid of that committee that's in our head and show up authentically, yeah, it's a very good book to read. So
Yeah.
I might continue with the next one then, because this one is one of my personal favorites at the moment. And it's called It Begins With You, and it's the 9 Hard Truths About Love That Will Change Your Life by Gillian Turecki. Now, this book is really interesting because it talks about love, but it's all about you. Like it starts with you, it begins with you. This title speaks to that personal responsibility side of connection and emotional intelligence and self awareness, and how our capacity to connect with others starts with how we connect to ourselves. And I've spoken about this a lot today. It's been, one of my flavors for this particular conversation that we have to connect to ourselves. We have to love ourselves because we can't have deep, meaningful connections without that. So, the key takeaway of this book is deep, meaningful relationships begin with emotional honesty and self compassion. And I would add to that, and self awareness. So, who we are will directly impact and affect the relationships that are around us. And we need to be responsible. I keep saying that
Yes, we
word, but
do.
we have to be responsible for how we show up as a starting point before we can expect anything from other people. It's one of those books that every chapter it's kind of sat me on my ass. I've had to kind of put the book down and really think about what I've read
Mhm.
because it is a journey to self before you can have the journey with others. So
Absolutely.
highly, highly, highly recommend this book. It's been one of my favorite reads this year.
Nice. I will have to put that on my list. My list is growing amongst all my doctoral program readings. So,
We won't talk
um,
about the library that I have in my house of books, Jason. We won't share that with people.
all right. So, our final book recommendation is Becoming Supernatural: How Common People Are Doing the Uncommon. And this is by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And the key takeaway from this book is when our heart and brain are coherent, we connect to a sense of oneness, purpose, and expanded awareness. And I just want to say that again because there just is so much truth to power in that statement of when your heart and your brain, when you can connect those two and they're in harmony, you get a sense of oneness within yourself, purpose, and expanded awareness. It's amazing on how much is so much clearer. There's always that common saying of like, people need to get out of their head, or stop wearing your heart on your sleeve. But imagine if you marry those two together in harmony. Yeah, just amazing and powerful. I don't know, Leanne, if you read this book or not.
Yes, it's another one that I've read. And not only is that expanded awareness within you, but it's with consciousness.
Mhm,
It's with energetic forces. So when we are in alignment, and we talked about this a lot last week, head, heart, soul, when we're in
mhm.
alignment and our energy is in alignment, and there is that sense of connection to self source and others, then anything is possible. We can create energetically things in our life that are brilliant and mind blowing. So another great book to read, but I'll stop there because I could talk about books all day and I won't.
Awesome. Okay, now we'll move on to our top 3 tips. Okay, so I'll jump in here with the first one,
Sounds
quality
good.
over quantity. Oh, I'm sorry, Leanne.
Oh, no, I just said sounds good.
Oh, sounds good. Yeah, quality over quantity, and just the snapshot of go deep, not wide, right? When you go deep with those connections who really know you, who really can show up for you, and that you can have those honest and real conversations with, it beats the go wide any day. Right. Yeah. I mean, the go wide, is like amazing for like, if you're selling a product or, if you want subscribers to your channel, those type of things. There are times that go wide is what's needed. Right. Um, but those connections only go so far, right? But it's like those deeper ones, that's when you really see the funnel, right? To be like, oh, okay, there may be five within that or 10, right? And if you can go deep with those connections, um magic will happen, and it'll make the times when going wide, when that's needed, much more clear.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that, Jason. The second tip, and I agree, depth over breadth,
Yeah.
isn't the way to do it. Like the deeper I go, I'd rather have a few really deep relationships and a plethora of acquaintances that I can't show up authentically for.
Yeah.
I want to be me, real, raw, weird, wacko, all of that stuff, right? Like that quirky part of me, and that depth of relationship allows for that.
Mm-hmm.
The second tip here is around practicing this idea of connection hygiene and really looking into, is technology enhancing or eroding my real connection?
Mm-hmm.
Be intentional about how you use it. Create digital boundaries for your household, for your workplace, with your kids, whatever it might be. Calling friends, like if we go out to dinner, everyone drops their phone into a bag, and we don't get to it until later. Even with your friends, because there is nothing worse than sitting at a table with people and they're doing this and there's no conversation. It does make you feel like I'm not as important as what's on the phone. Um, and we're losing the art, right,
Mm-hmm.
of being able to connect well and to build that depth of relationship. So call friends instead of just liking their post. Check in with them mindfully, right, rather than just the ticks and flicks, and actually spend the time to build and foster those deep connections so you can show up um, in a way that nourishes others and not having and having them nourish you. And the thing to ask yourself is this interaction that I'm currently doing, is it nourishing me or is it a numbing agent? Because often
Mm-hmm.
we use technology to numb so we don't have to feel the feels. But again, feeling the feels is important. So
Yeah.
is this nourishing me or is it numbing? That's the question I want to leave you with around practicing this connection hygiene.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much power in that. We've left our listeners today with so many challenges and questions to ask, but they're so rich. And if you take some time just to sit with them and journal with them or reflect on them as you're out on a walk, it's just amazing, the ahas that will start coming to you, and the light bulbs that will start turning on. And our last top tip is build resilience through relationships. Connection, when it really gets down to it, is a two-way street. It's a two-way lifeline. um and it's that giving and receiving support that strengthens both parties and helps regulate stress and all that. And it's where they say it takes two to tango. Well, it takes two to connect, right? And um and really looking at that balance and that give and take with one another builds shows that resilience. And simple gestures, right? Like a smile. My gosh, how many times do we not even see a smile as we walk down the sidewalk anymore? If you walk down the sidewalk, right? Or in a store, like everyone's just so, or into their phones or whatever. And so um remember, a smile can go a long way. It can change somebody from having a bad day to a good day, at least in that micro moment, right? And those moments of listening, that listening to understand versus listening just to get your reaction out there, right? And to build that emotional wealth and that collective wealth. And, with that, like being emotionally available, like we said earlier, if you model that emotional availability behavior, it's amazing on how much it can free up another person who may be like super guarded and is like, no, I don't want to show my emotional availability because of A, B, and C. But if you showcase that in an authentic way, in a real way, it's amazing the power at the other end.
Yeah.
Um, and
Can
a
I just
quote
say
is,
to, oh, sorry, go on,
oh,
go
yeah,
on.
no, no, no. So I'll just say the quote and then I'll hand it over to you, Leanne. The quote is, resilience isn't just individual strength, it's a relational strength.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
just wanted to double click on what you said there. How we show up gives permission for other people to show up. So
Yeah.
if we show up authentically and vulnerably, we're opening the door for others. We're letting them see that it's safe to do that. Um, and so who we are and how we show up will directly allow others to step into that space. And I think that is a beautiful thing. Don't wait for somebody else to do it for you. Be the one.
Be
Okay.
the one.
Oh, dear. Very good. So, next week's podcast is on cultural well-being, where we're looking at embracing the tapestry of humanity. And I can't wait
I
for this
know, me too.
conversation. There's so many themes and strings and like so much that we want to bring to life in this particular conversation around really embracing the tapestry of humanity, not
Mhm.
and I'll just leave it there because I could go on
Yeah.
a rant about that right now, which I will not do, but I'm very much looking forward to that conversation.
Yes, me too. Me too. And it'll be a surprise if we have a special guest or not.
Yes.
We'll leave you with that percolating in your mind as well.
So, Jason, I think we've come to the end of our conversation today around interconnection well-being. And I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that you have enjoyed this too, that being our listeners and obviously my partner in crime here. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was just such a rich conversation. And it just always, amazes me how just even the two of us can take up an hour and a half,
I know.
without a special guest. And that's the amazing flavor that like we loved for our listeners is that ebb and flow of conversations between you and I, and then the conversations that we have with our guest experts. And with that, we thank you for joining us for today's conversation on interconnection well-being and just all the richness that it has brought to our listeners today.
Yeah. And as always, we hope we've sparked something new, whether it's an insight, a fresh perspective, or even just a new question worth pondering and exploring.
Exactly. And as always, our mission here at Let's Talk is simple. It's to have the conversations that matter, and to remind you that you don't have to figure out this thing called life and all of its complexities on your own. We're here to walk alongside you and to be your friend in conversation, whether it's a conversation between Leanne and I or with one of our guest experts. We're here for you.
Yeah. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please do as we always ask, share it with a friend, like it, subscribe, and keep the conversation going with us.
Exactly. Just an example of going wide,
Yeah.
right? Because when we talk,
We really talk.
and anything is possible,
So let's talk.
real conversations.
And limitless possibilities. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you're dialing in from in the world.
Thank you.